the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being. And I love that form of words because there's no separation in it between us and God, us and the source, us and one another. And then immediately he says, as one of your own poets has said. So immediately he's quoting Greek culture and emphasizing me, we are all one. And he mocks the idea of sacrificial religion, the idea that we should serve a superior God, and reframes that as we serve one another. In the same way, Jesus reframes the idea of loving God as we love one another. Yeah. And those teachings are aimed at unraveling that slave wiring and getting us into a brotherhood, sisterhood wiring. And there are many teachings aimed at exactly that, to alter what we do, how we live, and then what we pass on to the generations that follow.
Just to go back a little bit here, Paul, when you said that we were taught what to eat, which plants to eat, which animals we can eat, we see that really explained in all of the scriptures. Does that go to suggest that we, in fact, may be a seeded race from the cosmos onto the earth, and we're placed here, and then that's why, after some study or whatever the case may be, they're informing the inhabitants that, hey, this plant is good for you, you can eat this? Because if we had evolved on this planet, you go figure that we would know what to eat, which mushroom is good and which mushroom is bad, through trial and error, right? But if we have this type of language where we are being taught, what are your thoughts on that? Because I like to understand that a little bit more clearly.
Absolutely. The view I've come to is very similar to the view that was put forward by Plato. And he had the idea that our ancestors in the deep past developed on planet Earth in the same way that all life on Earth developed. And that was happening because life in the cosmos is the norm rather than the exception. To put it in modern terms, that the genetic coding for conscious intelligent life has been disseminated throughout the cosmos, that whenever it lands on an hospitable planet, a planet with water, it will generate life forms similar to the ones with which we're familiar on planet Earth. So Plato had his language for that. So here we are developing nicely on planet Earth, and then we get some visitors who Plato calls the children of God, who adapt us for higher consciousness and higher intelligence. Now, as I read the Hebrew scriptures and then other ancestral narratives, the picture complicates, and it seems that there were a number of visitations and a number of interventions and a number of upgrades. And in Genesis chapter 3, we've got a story of a very decisive upgrade where our visitors are working with and the Popol Vuh has a parallel story, working with some kind of a primate to upgrade the primate to be the working class, to go and work down the mines, as Genesis hints at, or as the Sumerian stories spell out. And so they upgrade it for higher intelligence. That's what happens in Genesis 3. So now you've got a creature that is part earthling and part the visitors.
Right.
Now that's the story that's told in the Greek stories, the Vedic stories, African stories, Sumerian stories. It's there in the biblical story. So now you've got something that is part earthling, but now there's something else as well. Yeah. And you've created essentially a brand new species. So you are going to have to work with that to habituate it to planet Earth and to the conditions outside the safety of the enclosed zone, which is what the Garden of Eden really means. And you might have to come back a little later to see how they're going and do some fine tuning.
It's like a designer dog. That's what it reminds me of.
That's so funny,
exactly. That's exactly what we have done, exactly what we've done with cats and dogs. So now we've produced some dogs, for instance, that are very beautiful to look at, but might have some breathing difficulties because of what we've done, or some eye difficulties because of what we've done, or
Yes.
spinal difficulties because of what we've done. And if we truly love our species of dog, we'll need to do a little bit more fine tuning so that we're not giving them health problems. So that's quite a good parallel. So
Right.
a few interventions have to happen, and there are so many ancient indigenous memories of helpers turning up to fine tune us, to help us adapt to the environment. There are lots of clues in Homo sapiens that there's something that doesn't quite fit with planet Earth. There's another layer to this story.
Right.
And then there are other things that can require another intervention. And so if you go, for instance, to a story that's told by the Mohawk, the Mohican people, there was a time when they found themselves in unfamiliar territory, in an unfamiliar climate, and where the survival of their tribe was very uncertain. They were not on their ancestral lands eating their familiar foods. And then helpers appear from out of nowhere to show them what is safe to eat here, where you find the medicines here. And so there's been a change
So
in the
amazing.
environment that requires help.
Right.
I believe that many of our stories of beginnings, the ones we're familiar with, such as in Genesis 1, what we're actually reading is the story of recovery. When there's been a cataclysmic change in the environment, we have lost most of the land, most of it's been flooded, and we desperately need others to turn up and show us how to survive. If you go to Karakadag in southeast Turkey, you will find a site that was examined by a team from the University of Az in Norway and the Max Planck Institute in 1998, team led by Manfred Hoyne, and they identified what they believe is the first farm in the history of our civilization, the first instance of genetic modification of naturally occurring plants to turn them into cultivatable crops, the first instance of animal husbandry. And the dating of it is very interesting, because the dating of it puts us right at the end of the Younger Dryas cold period, when there would have been massive flooding around the planet, and when once again the survival of Homo sapiens was hanging in the balance. That's exactly the kind of moment when you need the input of helpers. And I believe that story is told in the story of Oannes and the Apkallu, stories told by the Babylonians. So there are all these different reasons why a number of interventions are needed to fine tune us, adapt us, give us new skills, new information, show us new foods, so on and so forth. So it's a very layered and a very long story.
Right. Right. I want to get back to the whole concept of authority for a moment here, and tie this into a question that Celeste is asking in the chat. So we're familiar. Well, I know you are familiar with the cycles of time, right? The golden age, the bronze age, especially when it comes to the Greek text, which lays it out and even talks about the type of man that existed in each age. But then we go to the ancient Indian text where they give the dates, right? And they also give themes to the ages, and this age is the age of authority. That's one of the themes, where we consider everything as a hierarchy, and that's why I constantly say, when we say higher dimensions, that's just a product of the times of the age that we're in. We're saying higher dimension, but that's just a construct of this authority kind of thing. We can only be better if we're higher, so I feel like what you were saying earlier about all of these avatars that came down to the planet with this information, but then when they left, when they were here, they were saying, do not worship me, please do not worship me. And even though I would say the Buddhist text is probably one of the major texts that has it over and over and over again, don't worship me. A lot of other texts that's kind of been taken away from it. But then when you read like the kingdom of heaven was within, you have all these little golden nuggets there. So what's your take on the fact that these avatars came down, they gave this information, they said, do not follow me, but then people still held them in higher regard and started worshiping them, which kind of goes away from the original purpose of their existence in the first place, right?
Yes, it does. I think you've said that beautifully, Neil. Absolutely. My start point into this journey was from Christianity. And in that, you've got Jesus saying, You know what people are like, he says. The peoples, you know what they're like, how they have leaders and leaders of leaders, and those in authority, and those at the top with absolute authority, and the plebs at the bottom. It must not be so among you, he said. And yet, how many generations later, we've got the people, the priests, the bishops, archbishops, prelates, primates, patriarchs, popes, emperor, God at the top. And we've constructed this pyramid with
Right.
us all scratching around at the bottom. How do you get there from Jesus saying that? Well, it is because of this hard wiring that we're fighting against. So he said what he said, did what he did to get us to see you are all peers, he said. You have no superiors. You're all brothers and sisters. And we struggle to take it on board. But I think in this age of authority, it is the thing we have to learn.
Yeah.
Our society is organized that way. We're all feeling it at the moment, for goodness sake. And we're having to learn in a fresh way. What does it mean to disengage from that?
Yeah.
And for me to live in a world where we are all brothers and sisters, including the despot who's trying to boss us all around. It comes back to what we were saying also about the channeling. And you're right to point out, Neil, that sometimes when we talk about higher dimensions, we click into this slave mentality again of superior dimensions and a sense of dependency. I was speaking the other day to a guy who I was so privileged to be sitting at his feet because he is someone who has done traditional initiation as a member of one of the Native American peoples. And he's a guardian of their knowledge. And he told me something about the initiation experience. And one of the things that flows from the initiation is the ability to engage with other entities, to engage with the spirits of ancestors, and to engage with interdimensional beings. But the way he described it prompted me to ask a question. I said, it sounds like you're not engaging with these other beings as a subject or as a viewer only or a hearer only, that you're engaging with some kind of authority, some kind of sovereignty. And he said, yes, absolutely. And it was interesting for me to hear that because I find that in primitive Christianity as well. If you go to 1 John 4, the writer of that talks about being in contact with other entities who he calls spirits. He doesn't say what they are or where they're from or define them. He just calls them spirits. And he says, don't believe every spirit that has gone into the world. Test the spirits, weigh it up for yourself. And what's so curious about that, first of all, is that's a little piece of primitive Christianity that got neatly forgotten. The idea that you could be directly in communication with other powerful entities in the cosmos didn't fit into that neat feudal order that the church evolved into. The other interesting thing is that the writer doesn't say what these entities are. What are they? Are they the spirits of ancestors? Are they interdimensional beings? Are they flesh and blood beings like us who communicate telepathically? Are they your higher self? Are they aspects of the cosmos itself? What he doesn't say, not important apparently. What's important is that you keep your sovereignty, you do your due diligence, work out what you think. And so there's that whole framework of inferior deferring to the superior gone. It's not in there at all. You're the sovereign being. You're getting information from all these sources.
Yes.
Think about it, reflect on it. Right. And so I find that quite an empowering little piece of teaching that's there. And it's, again, another one of those little time bombs just waiting to blow open this concept of we are here to serve those better than ourselves.
It just needs to click. We just need to get it, you know?
We just need to get it. Yeah, that's right.
The information's there.
Just to piggyback a little bit on this, going back to Celeste's question, I thought it was pretty cool. Would our flight or fight, our reptilian brain have anything to do with serving authority? And let's say if we were able to get rid of that aspect of our brain, that reptilian brain, would that need to worship something or to succumb to authority, would that disappear as well, I wonder? Celeste as well, I guess,
Wow,
is wondering the
that's
same thing.
Celeste. What a wonderful question. We could run a
Mhm.
whole conference on that question.
That's so
Um,
true.
yes is the short answer. But of course, we can't get rid of our reptilian brain. It's right in the core of our brain. And somebody pulled me up the other day for calling it the most primitive part of our brain, because they said, look, any reptilian beings listening in on this are going to be very offended by you saying that. So I'll
It's
say
the
instead,
oldest part of the brain too, is
it's
from
the oldest
what
part
I've
of the
heard.
brain.
Yeah,
That's right. It's the part of the brain we share with a
everything.
lot of life forms
Yeah.
on this planet and on others beside. And you don't want to get rid of that because it keeps you safe, especially if you're living in the jungle. You need that flight, fright, or fight response. And from time to time, you need it in other environments too. But what we need is our higher faculties to play their full role. And I think the answer to your question is yes, in the sense that fear is the button that gets pressed to get us deferring to authorities. So, I mean, I live in Australia. I mean, I hardly need to say more in 2021 to unpack that. Fear is the button being pressed to get us to comply with what the authorities want us to do. Now, all governments want their people to comply. Of course they do. They want the people to be easy to govern. And so right now, fear is the button that's being pressed.
Yeah.
It happens in other ways too, though, because I think very often if you talk to people about breakthrough moments in their life, when they've been able to change their life and do something exciting and new, it's because they've been able to overcome the fear.
Yeah.
Like
They
for
haven't
instance,
gotten rid of their reptile brain. They haven't gotten rid of the fear. They've just been able to do something else. So that applies to getting out of an abusive relationship. You might not do it because where are you going to go? Can you look after yourself? You might be frightened to leave an abusive boss because will you get another job if you leave this one without a job to go to? And very often that's the fear, or the fear of poverty, that keeps us from making really interesting and exciting choices with our lives. But every
or
so
something
often, we do
as
it.
as simple as a spider. People are afraid of spiders, and to overcome that spider, you have to put that spider in your hand and overcome that fear. So I think that's what you're referring
Well,
to.
Omar, yeah, I do agree. I have not yet put a spider in my hand in the way you described, but I had to overcome my fear of spiders to move to Australia, because I grew up in the UK, where every couple of weeks you'll be treated to a documentary telling you just how many venomous and deadly creatures live in Australia.
Hilarious.
And at some point I had to say, well, I'm moving there anyway. So, I mean, to do anything exciting and creative, you have to not get rid of the fear, but just act on some other stuff.
Yeah.
Act on some imagination, some aspiration, some vision, and some higher faculties. And that's a big part of the struggle of life, not just for human beings. I think it's a very profound thing, because as soon as we become material beings, we have to struggle with the fear of non-existence. That's true if we're human, if we're animal, if we're a plant. And so I actually think it's a very profound, fundamental part of the learning that we are here to do in this material life. How do you live and thrive when you might actually stop existing? How do we do that? That's really the struggle we're all struggling with. And it manifests in all sorts of different ways. It can be the fear of death itself, the fear of illness, the fear of injury, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of losing a job, the fear of poverty. They are all versions of the same thing, the fear of non-existence.